This is Kim Drucker-Stockwell with the Women's Survival Guide here with Eva Douzinas, and we today are going to talk about fish. I think you're going to be a bit put off on what kind of salmon you've had on your plate that you've been buying at the grocery store here in the US and around the world. She began her career as a co-founder of a maritime management software company, had a big career, but was sort of the quiet partner. And now she has started a nonprofit that addresses the realities of aqua farming in the oceans. And she has found a big voice to talk to the world, from BBC to all the different papers. And it's kind of a dirty little secret of how dirty fish farming is in our oceans. And on top of that, the government has the right to impose fish farming on our states, so our federal government. And that is one of the things that she is fighting, but it all started with her own family's home from where her father grew up in Poros, Greece. So I'm going to hand it over to Eva to tell us about her major pivot post retiring from her software company to starting something in her own backyard. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate these kind of platforms because you're usually speaking to the decision makers in the home for families. And one of the things that shocked me the most when I started this is I really had made a big effort to have my kids like fish and enjoy eating fish. And I got them to like eating salmon, and we were eating it on a weekly basis. And it just happened through the plans that I learned for the island that my dad is from, where the government is planning to put industrial fish farms on 25% of the coastline of this small, beautiful green island. At the time, I thought fish farms were good for the environment in terms of that they helped save wild fish, and then we wouldn't overfish wild fish. But when I still, despite thinking that fish farms weren't a bad thing, I thought 25% of the coastline is a really extraordinary amount to dedicate to an industry for a natural small island. And so it just happened to be at the time when I was taking over the Rausch Foundation, and our strength for the past 30 years has been in research. And so I had our head of research start to dive into it. And I often use a phrase, you can use the phrase when something's too good to be true, but when it comes to industrial farming of fish in our oceans, it's too bad to be true. Not only are we destroying the ecosystems where the farms are based, but we're also consuming, in the case of salmon, sea bream, and sea bass, and other carnivorous species like those, we're actually consuming a lot more wild fish to produce a much smaller quantity of fish. Actually, a big study just came out this week by the University of Miami, which is one of the first independent studies outside the industry that shows that about 4 to 5 kilos of wild fish are required to create 1 kilo of salmon. So, it's fundamentally unsustainable for our oceans, and the actual farming methods are destroying our coastlines.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And when you went back to Poros, and was it after you had stopped heading up the software company that this happened, or was there an overlap, or?
No, we sold the majority of the software company I built with my ex-husband in 2017, and I decided, I had this opportunity and good fortune to kind of give back, and so I started a nonprofit on the island of Poros the same year with my cousin Faye Orfanidou, who runs it on the ground there.
Uh-huh.
And our original goal was to focus on bringing education seminars around career development, around entrepreneurship, and also more cultural opportunities to the island. But then it was around a little over 2 years ago, we learned from the mayor of Poros at the time about this plan that they were fighting to stop industrial fish farming from coming to the island. And it just dawned on me in that moment that if that was going to happen, like everything we were working for on the nonprofit side really would be meaningless if the whole environment is destroyed, because the only reason people come there is because of how beautiful it is and
Right.
how the beautiful seas. And we're very close to Athens, so we have a lot of yacht traffic. We have one of the largest and safest harbors in Greece, because we're so closely positioned to the Peloponnesian Peninsula. So
It wasn't there already some aquaculture there that you could see, I think you
yes,
said?
yeah,
Yes.
there's a small fish farms there now, which take up about 25 acres, which still seems pretty big. And the plan is to expand it to about 600 acres of actually larger, 700 acres of coastal waters, which would take up 25% of our coastline. And they would be allowed to tear down the forest, and to put up their processing plants, which is something that in Greece we're very protective of forests because of all of the fires that happen every summer. So we've already experienced the environmental damage, and actually another nonprofit called Ozone NGO, they've done a big study showing that the small fish farms that exist today in Greece are the number one cause of styrofoam pollution and plastic pollution in the Aegean
Like
Sea.
you're like yeah, everything you say, it's like they just
Yeah.
and I think the so there we know the bad now. But the question is, and I think I know the answer to it,
Mhm.
but so if they're farming salmon
Mhm.
and they're taking basically, let's call it three fish to one salmon, like
Mhm.
that they're carnivorous and they need to be
Yes.
fed fish meal. And you remember the last time we talked, you said they're basically taking all the fish from the third world nations
Yeah.
and feeding these fish that they're these fish farms that they're putting off the coast of, say, Maine, or they're putting off
Mhm.
the coast of Poros,
Yes.
and to create these fish. And
Mhm.
those salmon, are
Mhm.
meant for basically restaurants, it sounds
Yes.
like, or Whole
Mhm.
Foods. Um,
Yes.
and they're farmed.
Mhm.
So before I go into sort of the process of what you've done, this
Mhm.
amazing pivot, I just would love for you to explain to people what goes into these fish. Like, why don't we want to eat? Like, not only is it a nightmare for
Mhm.
the environment,
Mhm.
but it's also really bad for us. Those fish that we got our kids to eat, they're really
Yeah.
not actually what they pretend that they are.
Yeah, so exactly what you said. So we're taking fish meal from the third world, like West Africa and South America. We're robbing people of their natural sustenance there. And then in order to transport that fish meal from those faraway locations, they actually have to treat it with chemicals to not catch on fire. And so, in the case of the United States, we've not banned a certain chemical that is a fire suppressant that's for the fish meal that's actually coming to feed the farmed fish here. And actually, the last place in the United States that's legal to farm salmon is Maine now. That used to be Washington State, but Washington State banned it in 2022. And so we've got the fire suppressant chemicals on the feed. Then we have, when they're actually in the farms, they need a tremendous amount of antibiotics to survive in this very unnatural environment. And there's a lot of diseases and something called sea lice, which in Greece, I know for a fact, and there was a study in Scotland about the amount of formaldehyde they have to use on the farmed fish the um, to deal with the sea lice and the diseases that are being bred in these pens.
Is that when
So
they're alive, the formaldehyde, or is that when they're dead? Is
I
that,
I
are they,
believe it's when they're dead that they put. I'm not 100% certain, but I know they're using jugs and jugs of formaldehyde, which supposedly disintegrates into the sea. And there's only trace amounts, but still formaldehyde is being handled by the people who are taking care of the fish farms, and just breathing formaldehyde is really bad for humans. And so and there's no labeling to tell us what the farmed fish are being fed, what are the chemicals applied to their fish meal, and what are the antibiotics they're being fed in the water. In Greece, we've also heard, and I believe it's true for all farmed fish, is they're also fed a tremendous amount of sedatives to not eat one another, and not because these are fish that eat other fish.
Mhm.
So and they're under a lot of anxiety in these pens because there's no space for them. And as we just did a study in Greece where we saw the entire seabed under the fish farm is covered in this bacteria that only grows in completely anoxic environments, so environments without oxygen. And I know that to be the case in Maine, Scotland, and Norway. They've found similar environments. And so we have a very low oxygen environment due to all the nutrient waste coming from the fish farms. Like someone described it as, these are the only farms in the world that don't have to clean their manure, because it's all being swept into the ocean.
Mhm.
And so you have fish being kept in these very low oxygen environments, and it becomes a very high stress situation for them. And with the warmings of the ocean, that also leads to the stress level of the fish, which I try not to focus too much on I mean, I do believe it's an animal rights issue as well, but I know that doesn't speak to people as much when it comes to fish. But we're not just talking about the suffering of the animals, but also the environmental damage, and because of the unnatural situation they're kept in, all the chemicals and pharmaceuticals they have to be fed to not die, which despite that, 25% of farmed salmon die before they're harvested. So as compared to chickens, which is about 1 to 3% of chickens are dying before they are able to be sold and
Well, I
fed.
think so. One of the things, so when we first started talking, I looked at
Mhm.
some of the stuff you sent me, and I think
Mhm.
I know we've talked about this. Our daughters happen to be very good friends, and
Mhm.
Penny will not eat salmon anymore. I guess you saw some picture at your
Yeah.
house of what untreated, what unpackaged,
Mhm.
unplated salmon looks like actually before it's prettied
Yeah.
up for market. And she's like, never gonna eat unless it's wild caught. Um,
Mhm.
and that's pretty rare, and it's seasonal, as you said.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think one of the things that there are two things that I think people need to think about, which is one, um, this isn't just an issue in Greece. This is
Yeah.
an issue, and like you said, Norway seems to be the evil empire in this.
Mhm.
They seem to own the companies
Mhm.
typically,
Mhm. It's
and that are
really.
pushing this, and
Mhm.
we don't think of them as being environmentally evil, uh,
Mhm.
and that our waters here in the U.S. are at risk as well, because even if the states just say they will not allow it, the federal government has the right and um, to impose fish farming maybe a little farther off the coast is
Yes.
maybe.
So, yeah, there was an executive order in 2020 that opened up our federal waters to industrial fish farming. And there's a group here in New York State called Don't Cage Our Oceans that's been fighting that decree.
Mhm.
They actually just had a very big win in the last week or two against the Army Corps of Engineers for a permitting open net pens in federal waters without having proof of the environmental impact they have. Because here, for example, there's fish farms that were being planned off the coast of Newburyport here in Massachusetts, and
Yes.
right in the middle of whale the paths that whales take across the water. And so these would be, even if they're not right on our shore destroying our coastline, they're right there in the path of marine mammals. So and then there's federal fish farms planned for off the coast of Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Long Island, Florida, and California. And so even California, which has already banned industrial open net pen farming in their state waters, if this was allowed to go ahead, there would be industrial fish farms like 3 miles off the coast.
It's just, see, this is the stuff like none of us are hearing. I mean, I'm going
Yes.
to send this out to friends of mine who are, involved in their communities in these various places just to let them know. And like you said, don't cage our oceans, and larger American groups that people just need to clue into. There's so much going on that's bad, but this one seems to be pretty bad. And then on top of it all, that it's basically fish farming to feed well off people, or just Americans, and it's not good for you on top of, most likely that it has to have trace chemicals in it. It has to have, has there been, have there been any studies on what the salmons on the plate contain, like the stuff that we've been buying at Whole Foods, and that neat little plastic packaging that I love to cook for my family because it's so neat?
Yes, there's scientists in Norway that have done studies on it, and they openly say like pregnant women should not eat farmed salmon because of the chemicals and treatments in it. There's a documentary that's being planned right now, actually by a Massachusetts filmmaker who's looking at the whole health angle of farmed salmon. And the United States is the largest consumer of farmed salmon in the world. We actually get most of our salmon from Chile, which are Norwegian, primarily Norwegian companies that have set up shop in Chile because they have a lot fewer
Rules.
environmental protection laws. And so Chile, and there's no such thing as salmon in South America naturally. Like salmon is an invasive species there. And I think one thing that restaurants and consumers need to understand is there's no way to farm salmon today in a sustainable way. There's even what's quote unquote the best regulations in the world, which is Norway and Scotland. They are suffering tremendous impacts from the salmon farming. There's a lot of resistance from the communities there because this is something that's imposed on them by the federal government. And and I know here, we actually had an intern do a little study here in Boston to see, are there any restaurants that are kind of aware of this issue? And unfortunately, for almost every restaurant, unless they don't serve fish at all, they're serving farmed fish. And if you ask them if it's farmed, they say, "Oh, it's wild farmed."
Wild
And,
farm.
and I was like, "Well, what does wild farmed mean?" And they're like, "Well, it's in the waters. It's not on land."
Right. It sounds great.
Yeah. And I'm like, well, that's actually the worst kind. And because actually the land-based farms are a little better. That you don't have they don't have to feed them antibiotics because they are not in the ocean, so they're not catching diseases. They don't pollute the oceans. Um, I think the biggest drawbacks of the land-based farms are that you still are consuming wild fish for the feed, and
That,
you're
that's what I was going to ask. They still, that salmon are carnivorous.
yes.
Oh,
And they haven't been able to replace fish meal in the diet of, they've tried even with there's chicken parts being fed
I
to
know.
salmon. It's like they're feeding a lot of soy to salmon to try to replace their protein needs.
That's a
But
problem.
they've not been able to 100% replace it. And a new innovative path right now is to use black fly larvae, which can be used up to a certain size of the fish, and it reduces the footprint of in like of taking wild fish from the oceans. But today 27% of wild fish caught in our oceans are turned into fish meal for feeding carnivorous farmed fish. And another thing, when something that's very, very misleading is when we say that this year was the year that more than half the fish consumed or seafood consumed on the planet is farmed. And they say that, so aquaculture is a huge sector, but actually only 5% of aquaculture is carnivorous fish farming. The majority of fish farming is herbivorous fish that's done in on-land ponds in Asia and in Africa.
But one
And
question,
yeah,
those, when you were saying how the salmon that are in the
Mhm.
pens in the ocean have to be basically drugged so they don't eat each other. I
Mhm.
can't imagine, so that's not going to change on land. They're still going to get treated with all sorts of weird stuff, aren't they? They just don't have the sea lice, like you said, and
Mhm.
they don't need the antibiotics, but they're still going to be treated with stuff, I assume, right?
I'd have to look into that, but I know they've also been bred to be the less aggressive ones.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
they they've selectively breed the fish to be able the ones that grow larger faster. Farmed fish is a lot more fatty than wild fish because of the lack of exercise and the type of food they're fed. I think something you did know about, which I remember, was that farmed salmon is dyed pink because it's naturally gray because they're not eating the the natural, like, I think it's like the shrimp and things in the ocean that give them their orange color. So they actually have a menu of colors that fish farm companies can choose from to say, like, perhaps in the United States we like it to be a little more peachy colored, but in Asia they might like it to be more orange. And so
Okay.
they choose colors based on the audience. And so it's
Guilty. I
kind of
definitely
creepy.
check out. I definitely am more attracted to the lighter colored salmon for some reason
Yeah,
in the
the dark red.
bread. I mean, it really is a horror. But I think let's talk about because what Women's Survival Guide's been doing is talking to women who've started something new after 50 that's totally different than what they've been doing.
Mhm.
And um, you this is a really natural course of events. You were involved in your community, you had this foundation, you were starting this thing, and the mayor came to you. Um, I think what's interesting about your new, I mean, I can't imagine you get much sleep because every time I talk to you,
Mhm.
I can tell there's been a million things that have happened in between. And um, basically, watching the things happen serendipitously. And if you kind of open your eyes to what's around you, like in your case, you were probably visiting your family and you're like, okay, I've retired from this job, I've sold this company. My kids are out of the house almost, or basically, um,
Mhm.
whole new brain to use. And
Yes.
like, what am I going to do? Did you have something else that you thought you might do with that extra time before
Yeah,
you dove
I
into
was,
this?
so we were looking at, like, for the foundation because we had this opportunity to change our mission statement. And I've always been really interested in practical skills for people that I feel are missing in our education system. And
That's
so we were going to focus on nutrition education and financial literacy for,
so good. Like all
yes,
of our kids, they don't get any of that in school.
yes.
Our private schools, our public schools. Like I'm like it was when we had home ec.
hmm
Um,
Exactly. Like it's such a glaring weakness of our educational system where you can graduate from the top schools in the country and never have an accounting class and never
oh yeah,
understand, like, the difference in types of mortgages or types of
I didn't have it.
investments or fees in investments, like, even so. And it's such a and you've really forfeit your power, especially women, actually, um because they oftentimes it's in traditional families, like the man is taking control of finances. And then if later on in life, when women are widowed or they go through a divorce, they find themselves stranded and not knowing how to support themselves or understand the financial situation they're in. So that was and we're still actually investing in that. We've found two amazing partners. Just when you say serendipitous, there's a partner in Vermont called Champlain College, and they actually are the number one source for financial literacy education of teachers in the country. And then they're partnered with a group in California called Next Gen Financial, and Tim Ranzetta, who founded that, he actually has dedicated his second career now to educating people on financial literacy, and making and trying to push for financial literacy being a required component of high school education across the country.
It should
So
just be stuffed into a free period or something like that. And it doesn't
Yeah,
have to be forever. It's not
no,
like you have to have a, 10 credit course or something. I mean,
exactly.
and the same goes for, I know it sounds, old fashioned, but how do you take care of your house? And
Hmm.
for men and women, in the old days, it was just like in my mom's generation, that was just
Yeah.
women.
Hmm.
But men and women need to know how to sew a button on, or how to properly clean, or how to properly cook, and how to properly do a budget for the house and what to expect. And
Hmm.
you're only as good as your parents have taught you, basically, or
Exactly.
how curious you are. But
Mhm.
nobody has the interest or the time anymore, because they're so hooked into their phone and the next great thing. And if I were my kid's age, it would be very hard to be
Mhm.
interested in those things unless you got it in school. Um,
Exactly. And
we've had three generations that have not had, well, or at least, yeah, three, mine, yours,
mhm.
the millennials, and the now what are ours, Gen Z?
Yeah.
Um, they've not had,
Mhm.
since the boomer generation, have not
Mhm.
had home ec, or like, remember the boys would have like automotive skills,
Yes.
or like
Yeah.
general skills,
Mhm.
electrical, blah blah blah. But I think that's phenomenal. So
Yes.
that's what you were kind of looking at, maybe?
That's what we were planning to go all in on. And we thought this was just going to be a side project and it turned into something a lot more, but I'm still very interested in the other. It's just that we've been really fortunate to find these partners in Next Gen Financial and Champlain College who are, they're doing such an amazing job. So our foundation is kind of taken a more straightforward approach where we just do grants. We're not in it with our whole
So
research department. So, but it's
that
there's a lot of
yeah.
great stuff happening with groups like here in Massachusetts. There's a big effort to try to get financial education as a required part of the high
Oh,
school curriculum. And I know for our high school
uh,
that Dr. Price is also it's something she's also personally interested in.
great. I was just thinking, I was like, I've got to send a note to
So.
our school. Like,
Yeah.
but you know what I'd love, when we finish and I collect all the notes and links, I'll
Yeah.
have links to obviously all the stuff that you're working on the in the fish world, but also the other stuff, because I just think
Mhm.
um, it sometimes it doesn't take a lot of effort to get stuff done, good
Exactly.
done. Uh,
Yes. And I think there's when you were saying like I think for us at this age, there's such an opportunity to give back and um, you know, to help in so many different ways in whatever way speaks to you. Because, I often I don't think for most people, fighting farm fishing is not what speaks to them, but it happened to be something that spoke to me. But there's so many areas that we can help out in, whether, you know, um, it's helping people get more prepared for the workforce. We have a real issue right now with a lot of refugees in our country that need to get implemented into the workforce. The politics, like so many areas that we can help. I mean, civics education. I think that's such a missing component of
there's-
young
our
people.
generation did get that. And
Hmm.
in part, it started with the Channel 2 stuff with Schoolhouse Rock.
Yes.
Um, we all remember those songs
Mhm.
but my kids didn't have any of that. And if anything, it's worse now.
Yeah.
So, uh, yeah, that's huge. Civics and home ec are two things that got wiped out of the, and it's not as though we're all bilingual now. It's not like,
I know.
not like they're like, which is another thing we
Yeah.
Americans are a little rough on.
Mhm.
But I love that you've just, through these sort of processes of you having a little more time in your life, have come
Mhm.
into these areas, and you've got the high functioning
Mhm.
ability from being a leader in your industry, in the software industry, to then pointing that towards um, issues that are important to you and that really should be important to us.
Yeah.
Uh, and like you said, is fish farming do people care about that in Minnesota, or in the middle of our country rather? And it's like,
Yeah.
not necessarily, but they should, because it's what's
Mhm.
on their plate. It's not just the ravaging of these beautiful areas.
Mhm.
It's, if you want to put it in your own backyard, it's what you're feeding your family.
Mhm.
And I think that's a really, that's a message that can stick, right? And
Yeah.
yeah,
And I think it's something we should really think about the impact we're having because, you know, we're affecting real people and real communities when we're buying farmed fish. We're affecting the communities where they're polluting their coastline. We're affecting the communities where the fish meal is being taken from. And I know that like a lot of other food systems have very serious issues. So I'm not trying to say that it's definitely it's not worse. I was factory farming of any kind
yeah,
has really serious problems today. I think that the answer lies in like eating local, eating what's locally caught, locally grown,
mhm,
um, and I think that that's our way to create the least footprint on our world is to not. I mean, it makes no sense. We're here in Boston, Massachusetts, right on the water,
yeah,
and almost all of our food is being flown in from the Faroe Islands, from Chile, from China. It just makes no sense,
right.
and
Well,
I
the
think
restaurants, basically, that's an area I can see you becoming. Um, I can see that message going like wildfire through restaurants, because the minute people figure out that the salmon at even at Toscano's or like wherever, like
yeah.
our local beautiful Italian restaurant
Mhm.
that I love, and I love their salmon, but there's no way it's anything but
Farmed
farmed.
because the industry has done an incredible job convincing us that salmon is the healthiest fish in the world by
Yep.
convincing us it's sustainably farmed, that convincing us that farm aquaculture is the future of the planet. There's been a tremendous marketing job from the industry, and
Excellent
I
job.
think yeah. So I think there's, the truth is coming to light because you can't hide it after a while. Like nature revolts, and that's what's happening. So,
Right. And that's the thing. And I think we're all lucky that um, your timing has come in. I don't, that
yeah.
you have the time
Mhm.
and the wherewithal to make this your one of your projects. Just to wrap up,
Mhm.
not so much about what and why you're doing it, but
Mhm.
kind of the idea of this major pivot that could really take up. I mean, I can see that you're involved in other things as well, and that you have like an insatiable appetite for causes. And I personally am like a
Mhm.
big fan of all the causes you're choosing.
Mhm.
Um, but the idea that you can, I do think that there's this new energy we find at a certain point in our lives that's kind of like, everyone's always like, oh, midlife, oh, menopause, middle age. And it's like,
Mhm.
but actually, you can utilize this. There's just there's so many things we don't even have to worry about anymore. From
Mhm.
like, if you did have kids and they're grown, great. If you didn't have kids, well, you're not gonna have them at this point, and it's
Mhm.
and marriage and dating and shaving your legs. It's just like
Yeah.
we can do all those things without worrying about all the things we worried about as a younger person.
Mhm.
That took up a lot of time. uh,
Yeah.
I just, what do you think about this next phase?
No, I feel the same way. Like I look back and I wish I hadn't had a lot of hangups. Like I was saying in my first career, I really was happy to be in the background and I
Mhm.
really cared about the operations of the business and I was always willing to put my partner first. And I realized that kind of like, I forfeited an opportunity to really be a role model to the other women in the business and I think that, it's like finding your voice and finding that you can make a difference. I think I've always been someone that I love working and I love, I never could stay in a job that made me unfulfilled. And so I think I'm really a big believer if you do what you love it, you don't feel like you're working a day in your
Right.
life. So,
Right.
and there's so many ways that we can give back. There's, even, small things like starting a book club or
Yep.
volunteering at the school. Like there's like, I don't think it all has to be on a global level, like even just helping in your own community. And we have so much knowledge to give back after kind of going, no one gets through life unscathed.
Right. Right. We
Um,
learn a lot.
yes. And so, yeah, it's very freeing to be, to just have the gift of time again. So,
It is an interesting thing, and I love the way you put that. And I like that there's thoughts on your former career and your former. You are by nature a really shy person, and
yes.
it is the opposite. Like you are definitely like you found your voice because
Mhm,
it's something you're very passionate about, and you can see that if you
mhm,
don't speak up and use your power and your platform, it's it may go very badly for Poros, and then
mhm,
we benefit because of it. We all have anybody
mhm,
like host or eats fish has an issue now.
mhm.
Um,
And
so
there's so many
yeah.
great um, organizations like working on this. Like there's a global salmon farming resistance that came out of Argentina, and that's actually a women-led group as well.
Really?
Yes,
Well,
they were Argentina is actually the first country in the world to ban industrial fish farming. And then the group that was successful there started a global alliance with the backing of Patagonia,
oh,
uh, because Patagonia is really helping to get the word out about salmon farming, and they've done films on what's happening in Iceland and Chile, in Tasmania, and so this group, the Global Salmon Farming Resistance, is which all led by women is a group now of like over 100 organizations worldwide of coastal communities and nonprofits trying to get the word out.
well,
So
I haven't seen it in our newspapers or anything. So I think, Boston, we're right in the middle of it. And it like you
yes,
said that it was about to happen in Newburyport, like right there.
yeah. And
You
so
know,
we're hoping, yeah, it's one of our goals for the new year is to work with with the media here in the United States to try to get the word out. There's a great group called Don't Cage Our Oceans, which is part of NAMA, which is the North American Marine Association, and they've been doing a tremendous amount of work. And they're partnered with a group called Slow Food, which is a great organization.
down. So I
Yeah,
gotta get the links.
yes. And so we're, hoping with the Slow Food or One Fish organization to do some chef workshops in
Oh,
the coming year to educate chefs on the subject, and
thanks
also
so
try to teach
much.
chefs how to use different kinds of fish. So
Right.
like there's no reason why every restaurant in America needs to serve, two
Salmon.
or three kinds of fish. Like
Right,
it doesn't make any sense.
right.
And so we're, in Greece, one of the best foods is sardines. And here we think of sardines, we think of canned food, but actually fresh sardines are like amazing. And
Amazing.
yes, and they're one of the most healthy fish to eat because they're always wild
Yeah.
and they're small, so they're low on the food chain, so they don't have a lot of metals, mercury in them. And they reproduce very quickly. So you're not fish like salmon can take up to 18 months, 2 years to grow.
Oh my
And
gosh. Oh,
yeah, so it's like
God.
it would be like farming the wolves. It would be like instead of cows farming wolves. It doesn't make any sense.
I think that's a really good likeness. I really don't understand it. And it's sort of like one of those things that I can't help but picture people sitting around in a boardroom somewhere deciding
Mhm.
that I know, like, let's make salmon the thing. Let's make
Yeah.
the hardest things to grow in that needs an unbelievable amount of fish food.
Mhm. Yeah. That's what I
And
want to go after the investors is something I want to shine a light on too, is because I don't understand how these investment companies sit down and think that this is a sustainable business. One of my um, allies in Greece, he works for a investment firm that focused on sustainability, and they had him look at aquaculture, and he was like, "Whoa, like no way!" He's like, "I'm not like we can't touch this," and I'm like, "How did anyone else look at this and think that it's an okay business to invest in?"
Yeah.
Um,
I'm
and
actually going to send this to a friend of mine whose
yeah,
husband was in one of those, and I'm just like in that food industry, in
yeah,
venture capital food industry. I just want to know, like,
yeah,
it,
like how do you, um,
you think, or like, are they involved in it? Like,
mhm.
it's one of those dirty little secrets. There's a lot of bad stuff that people do just because they make a boatload of cash. To what,
Yeah.
you know?
Salmon has been very profitable, but in like sea bream and sea bass, which is what's farmed in the Mediterranean, that has not been a profitable industry. Like in Greece, there's been continuous bankruptcies, and the only reason they survive is because of European subsidies. So that's another one of our big targets is, okay, maybe there'll always be some carnivorous fish farming, but it definitely should not be supported by tax dollars. Like that just makes no sense. So,
Yeah, especially if it keeps going bankrupt.
yeah.
Like that. What part of that? Oh, anyway. Well, I for one am so grateful for what you're doing. And I know everybody else will once they look into what you're doing.
Mhm.
Is there anything else is there anything I haven't covered that you want to talk about or
Well, I really appreciate this opportunity I'd love feedback from you and from the audience too on how to reach consumers because that's something we haven't, that's our new foray and reaching health-minded, educated consumers would kind of be our first target is to try
yeah.
to, because I think, and then go, there's always going to be people who don't care, but I think at least I believe here in Boston, people are going to care.
They might not care, but they care what they eat.
Hmm.
And more, they care what they feed their kids.
Yes.
So that's the thing. Like they may not care at all about the oceans, but
Yeah.
I don't know a parent out there that, especially if the moms are doing all the grocery shopping, which typically
Mhm.
they do. Um, no, there's no way. I mean, if I had known, if I had known that, I did exactly what you said. Every week we had salmon
Mhm.
in different ways.
Yes, I
They
know.
loved it. It was great.
Yeah, and it's easy to cook, so
Mhm. It's quick.
it's quick.
And it
Um,
freezes really well.
mhm.
It unfreezes really fast. Yeah.
So yeah, it's almost a perfect product. Almost.
Trust me. Yeah, my kids loved it. But I'd only do like once or twice a week because like everything, and I'm sure you'll get into this at some point, um, too much of a good thing. Like they're like, oh, you can't eat chicken all the time because the chicken eat the rice and the rice has arsenic. Or you
Yeah.
eat, like, there are all these I'm almost like frozen sometimes at the grocery store. Like, okay, well, what
Yeah.
can't eat too much beef, can't eat too much tofu because of the you can't eat too
Yeah.
much. So like you can eat vegetables, I guess, but they're
Yeah.
not so fun.
I
So
know that, and I had to write that article for a Medium that I was invited to write,
yeah,
where it said that salmon is not Mediterranean, and that really, when you do think back to like what the principles of the Mediterranean diet is, it really is like, a variety. It is local foods, a mixture of vegetables, beans, and lean, protein, like, but it is fish, but hopefully
like
like lower
sardines,
than,
right?
yeah,
Like white.
sardines, lower on the spectrum fish. Um, Occasional beef and chicken. So it is a wide variety. I think, any extreme is not good as we're learning.
Right. It's
And
true.
yeah, I know I do find um the supermarket's quite like a daunting experience nowadays because you don't know. So, and just try to aim for local is my new philosophy.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
Well, Eva, thank you so much. Eva Douzinas, who is spearheading our Save Our Oceans from aquaculture and our plates from creepy looking gray salmon in a boat. Thank you so much for coming, and I'll put all those links in the post. And so I'm gonna say goodbye, but you and I can talk after.
Okay, thank
So,
you.
Women's Survival Guide, thank you.